For this edition of Now Age Conversations, I'm speaking with my friend Margaret Kimberley. Hey, Margaret.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Margaret, if you don't know, is the editor and
Wait,
senior columnist at Black Agenda Report website, News, Information, and Analysis from the Black Left. I recommend people go there and check it out. I want to talk a little bit today about the political wrap-up 2016, coming to what seems like the year from hell is coming to an end. It seems like, maybe it can only go up from here, but who knows? One of the things I like about Margaret is that you're not swayed by propaganda, which is such a big deal today. To me, the big crisis is of discernment. Is that people just don't know what to do with the information, and they're very swayed by fear and easily manipulated by fear.
mhm.
And I had a couple of things I wanted to bring up, but first, what came across the wires today about Obama rearming the Syrian rebels on his way
Yes.
out the door, and this whole sort of terrorist killing spree. They want to kill as many as this is just craziness. If you read just even what the New York Times is reporting about, they're open about they want to kill as many as they can and whatever that takes. And there was a piece from Consortium News, which is another great website that came across today, this afternoon, called Obama's Dive into the Syrian Abyss by Gareth Porter. And one of the things he says here, which is so sort of ominous, what was a disastrous blunder in terms of the consequences for the Syrian people, therefore, was the only choice acceptable to the powerful national security institutions that constitute what has become the U.S. permanent war state. Their first concern was to ensure that existing military and intelligence arrangements and relationships were not jeopardized. That's pretty chilling.
It's very chilling and it's very, very frightening. Ever since Election Day, ever since Hillary Clinton was defeated, the Obama administration has been flailing about, and desperation is the only word I can use to describe it. Um, this state of permanent war, the War Party, which includes Democrats and Republicans, by the way, were very much rattled because Donald Trump, he's so unpredictable. You don't know what he means or if he knows what he means, but he has said things like there would be no more regime change, like having a better a rapprochement with Russia. These things, which seem like simple, reasonable statements, are very dangerous to these people who believe that the United States essentially has to run the world, and that imperial hegemony has to be maintained, and there cannot be any deviation from that route. Excuse me. So the Hillary Clinton's lost, and she was a hawk. She was the one who apparently was played a huge role in convincing Obama to destroy Libya, and flush with that success, to move on to Syria. So she was going to continue and make this Obama's third term. And after she lost, the president has looked, frankly, afraid at certain points, as he spoke about fake news, as they ratchet up this this Russophobia. Continuing the stories, the piling on about Putin and about Russia and the charges that Russia hacked into the DNC and tried to manipulate the election. This is all a sign of desperation, and it is very frightening. The Syrians and the Russians are succeeding in taking back Syria from the terrorists who were sent by the U.S. and their allies. And with only a few more weeks to go, it's like the moving van has pulled up to the White House. But Obama is trying to do everything he can between now and January 20th to maintain the status quo. But that's very, very dangerous.
Yeah. Um, so you mentioned fake news, and I wrote something a couple of weeks ago. This whole thing about fake news is such a joke because the fake news is obviously what the mainstream media puts out as news. For
Hmm.
instance, the reporting that the mainstream media did about the Iraqi war, and New York Times, Washington Post, and the Guardian pushing us to war with Iraq. I mean, that's fake news. That's promoted.
Yes, it
I
is.
mean, this story about Pizzagate or whatever came up. I mean, it came and went, and it was, I mean, just nonsensical. But these propaganda stories that come up, which real consequences, which turn the world on end,
Hmm.
and with no end in sight. Um, uh, there was a story that the Washington Post ran a couple of weeks ago, naming some news outlets and blogs, including Black Agenda Report, right?
Yes.
And this piece about being Russian sympathizers and naming this sort of shadowy group that highlighted which organizations and news sites were there. Can you talk a little bit about what happened and how you got caught up in that dragnet?
Well, I think it's we were very proud to be on the list of Putin's puppets, useful idiots, Russian spies, or I felt like we should call ourselves Boris and Natasha after that. But it was really a list, an honor roll, as I called it. Were among many websites, the only one oriented towards African American news. We're proud to say that ended up there, but we tell the truth. We take on the administration. We do not accept what they and the rest of the corporate media, their partners in crime, have to say. So we analyze the news and we debunk what they say. And apparently that's enough to be called an agent of Vladimir Putin. And but it quickly fell. Well, it was. Let me say a couple of things about it. It was very dangerous. I mean, because the Washington Post was the only paper that ran with this story, and I think that proves it was a project of the Democratic Party. This anonymous site, prop or not, propaganda or not, clearly this is a Democratic Party effort. The Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, the Amazon guy, um, who has contracts with the CIA, by the way. So it is pretty ominous. But I think it fell apart somewhat just of its own weight. It was just there was too much skepticism about it, and even though there is unfortunately too much belief in what the administration says. It was a little too much. They jumped the shark, I think, to use that expression about popular culture with this story, but they have not let up. First, they said that there were some Russians who hacked. Then they said it was definitely the Russian government. Then, within the last couple of weeks, they say it was Vladimir Putin himself who ordered the hacking. And this escalation of charges is, as far as I can tell, it's proof that it's all a lie. But it's not something we can laugh at because it shows you the danger that the administration is willing to place us in, that they want to end up on top before January 20th. And I think regime change in Russia has always been an American dream. It was a dream of Hillary Clinton. I think it is of Obama. And now that it's all looking like it's starting to fall apart, I think they are taking increasingly dangerous risks.
Yeah. Talk about calling out truth with what you do at Black Agenda Report. Um, the cause of Trump, the rise of Trump, and I've been writing about, this sort of Obama, Hillary neoliberalism, sort of the Democratic Party agenda for 30 years, which has been leading up to this moment. Trump didn't just show up onto the scene.
No.
He's a result of a cause and effect
Mm-hmm.
that's been happening for a long time. I feel bad for people who are just waking up to it now and feel terrified and outraged. But they certainly weren't outraged. When all this was going on under Obama. I mean, for instance, Trump talking about he wants to perpetuate the arms race. Well, it was Obama who, signed an order for, was it $1 trillion, 30-year plan to what they call modernizing our nuclear arsenal. And nobody,
Yes.
you didn't hear any liberals, there was no, there was no protest, no
No.
outrage, nothing about that. And I mean, here's where the bullshit meter goes off the charts. Obama now says he would have won, against Trump, and forgetting, of course, that Obama boxed out any opposition to Hillary. Right?
That's right.
He made sure the Democratic Party was as empty and vapid as anything that, and we see the results of it now. And now that she's lost, to come out and say, to your point about how desperate they are, blaming Putin, he's blaming her, she's blaming him, Bill's blaming Comey. I mean, they're all blaming somebody else. But the talk about the truth here is that the neoliberal agenda of the Democratic Party brought us to this moment. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, it's not clear to me that he would have won. I think it's possible he also could have lost in the Electoral College to Trump. Now, he's a better liar than Hillary Clinton, as I love to point out, so he might have been able to pull it out. But the Democratic Party, the game was up. There comes a point where you can't fool all of the people all of the time. Obama was a new face. Excuse me. A new senator. He hadn't even finished his first term. As a young person, the first Black president, one of the few Black senators. I mean, it was a story made by Hollywood. He knew all the right things to say to progressives. He was presented as an anti-war candidate. And following Bush, of course, it was easier to look better. But after 8 years of the same thing, the only thing that they pointed to, even the president's defenders could point to, was Obamacare, which is problematic. It has helped many people, but it is not what most people envisioned or wanted. So the time was ripe for an outsider to come along and pick it all apart. Now, Bernie Sanders could have been that person. I was never impressed with him, I have to say, because first of all, I wasn't sure he really wanted the nomination. He clearly would have been better and would have had a chance, because you needed an outsider to beat an outsider. But no one will talk about the fact that Hillary Clinton lost Wisconsin, lost Michigan, Pennsylvania, these states that were reliably Democratic, partly out of incompetence. She didn't even show up. She was so convinced that the pollsters' logarithms and algorithms were correct that she didn't have to do anything as old-fashioned as actually set foot in these places and shake hands with people. But these parts of the country, which have been depressed for years, that were deindustrialized on purpose by the same people who, let's be honest, picked the presidents, the bankers, the financial services people, and these regions of the country have been left with nothing. And why is it Donald Trump who said, I want this party to be the party of workers, which I don't know if he really means that, but how is he the one who got to make this point about these deindustrialized, depressed regions of the country? This used to be something that Democrats talked about, but Democrats just want the White House so they can push through these trade deals and do deals with the Republicans. That's all they want. And by the way, now they're left with nothing. They lost the House. They lost the Senate. They sat back while the Republicans gerrymandered these safe seats across the country. So the Democrats are out completely by threading the needle that closely that, well, we can keep the White House and it'll all be okay. Well, they messed up and lost that too. So, but to your point, their only allegiance was to neoliberalism, and it showed. How do you lose Michigan when, after the Flint water crisis, you're the party in the White House? You have this city that was poisoned, literally, by their Republican-run state, by cutting off their supply of clean water to a poisoned river. I mean, this could have been something that Hillary Clinton ran with, But Obama just went to Flint for a photo op and gulped some water and said, maybe I got some lead as a kid. I turned out all right. And that was it. And that spelled defeat. All they cared about was pushing TTP and war and controlling the world. And people weren't having it anymore. They either voted for Trump or they stayed home.
So you talked a little bit about Bernie. Now the fate of the Democrats. Bernie now he's elevated, I guess, to some sort of level within the party. He seems to be some sort of elder statesman that he has our revolution kind of thing happening now. And so where do we go now? I mean, I talked back in March, and it's funny. Somebody reposted that conversation that we had recently and said we predicted actually what was going to happen. And they said, I went back and watched it. I said, actually, we were pretty spot on. Actually, it was pretty funny. So I'm wondering now about going forward with Bernie and the Democrats. What do you see going forward now?
It's hard to say. I don't think any of the people being mentioned as leaders of the party or candidates in 2020 are going to should pass muster. I think we have it backwards. I think the rank and file need to tell the Democratic Party what they want him to do. These are people who we should not listen to. This is an absolute debacle. This defeat is total. And for us to sit back and wait for them to present a leader is crazy. So I think whoever the nominee is in 2020, it should be no one who's being talked about now. I don't know if it could be Bernie Sanders. To be honest, I think he's a bit old. I believe he's in his 70s already. It could be, but I think what has to happen first before we talk about new leadership is that the Democratic rank and file have to make their needs known. We came to believe that the only way for Democrats to win was for progressives to be silent and to let Bill Clinton get rid of welfare, to rev up mass incarceration, for Obama to continue and expand Bush's wars. And no matter what the Democrats did, we were to stay silent and just trust them to defeat the Republicans, which they didn't even do. So I want to see an uprising of sorts among the membership and telling the leadership what we want. Rather than try to come up with a name, make demands of them. Tell them that there are red lines they can't cross anymore. Let them know we're not going to overlook everything that they do, because that has brought us nowhere. It's brought us to defeat and being completely out of the electoral process.
So in this election, I think I'm accurate in saying we both voted Green Party for Jill Stein. Mm-hmm. What's your feeling about what happened with the recount effort and as far as Green Party sort of future going forward now?
Well, I'm still a supporter. I think the Democrats have made the case for me that people need to move on. Every 4 years, people start saying, it would be nice if we had another party. Well, it's not something that's going to be bestowed on us. It's a decision we have to make. And I think it's important to say that we can replace the Democratic Party. And it could happen, I think, in a fairly short period of time. The Greens only got 1 million votes across the entire country. This fear of Trump, you have to vote for Hillary, you can't vote for Trump. It was successful, unfortunately. And so the outcome was not as good as many people expected. This recount, I think it was a mistake. It started off with a good intention because the Democrats said nothing about counting votes. And this is the second time in 16 years that a Democrat lost, won the popular vote, but ended up losing in the Electoral College. The Democrats should have been the ones to demand a recount in certain states. But Jill Stein's decision to go ahead with this, I think it was important to reveal how votes are stolen, particularly against people of color with voter suppression and these ID requirements and sending defective voting machines to certain neighborhoods. All of these things can impact the outcome. But unfortunately, the Greens got caught up in this Russian hacking, and in one of the I think it's a deposition. I'm blanking on the legal term. In going to court and requesting a recount, I believe it was in Wisconsin. They actually mentioned this, foreign interference, which was a mistake. But I think the Greens can rebound, especially with the Democrats looking so bad. And I think it's important for Greens to run for office. I think if people see Greens running for office and they're not this, strange group that emerge every 4 years and, or blamed for Democrats losing, I think it's important to keep up this commitment to really strengthen a progressive party so we're not stuck in this trap of the duopoly where, at this point, the only thing the Democrats can say is, what about the Supreme Court? I mean, that's all they're left with. All they're left with. They're the party of war, the party of austerity. They don't protect people even after we know how often people are killed by the police. Not one prosecution. No help to depressed parts of the country. No help for unemployment. Nothing. So when that's all you have to talk about is the federal judiciary, and it is important, I'm not going to say it isn't, but when it comes down to that's all you can say that makes you superior. I mean, look what the Democrats did when Obama first came in, 2009, 2010. They had majorities in both houses of Congress, and they could have done anything they wanted to. Did they raise the minimum wage? No, I think it was 70 cents or something like that. So they are helping make the case for a new party and for progressives to stop being afraid. And now my argument is, well, they're so incompetent. It's like, you can't. They used to squeak through and hold the White House, but at this point, we can honestly tell people, what do you have to fear?
Yeah. Well, I mean, while most people seem to be fearing January 20th and ready to protest and all sorts of things about Trump and certainly his cabinet picks and administration is not shaping up to be anything that we want to cheer about.
No.
Aside from you and I and some other friends, most people are talking about waxing poetically about how they're going to miss Obama. There was a piece in the New York Times last month, an op-ed piece, which I wrote about last week in my column, talking about the comedian in chief, about how we're going to miss his sort of his comic tendencies and how he was, a great guy, could deliver a great joke. And one of the examples was that he was being interviewed by Stephen Colbert, and Colbert said, "Well, what are your qualifications for a job going forward?" He goes, "Well, I did win the Nobel Peace Prize," and Colbert said, "For what?" He said, "Well, I'm not really sure exactly." And that's all presented as a joke, and it's sort of like the joke that George Bush at the Correspondents' Dinner when he was looking under the table for the WMDs. It's like the same thing.
Yes.
It's not very funny.
No.
But people somehow have this, he's got a beautiful family and he never cheated on his wife that we know of. And, as if all these things are benchmarks. But,
right.
What you and I were just talking about a little while ago, what he's doing now on his way out the door is terrifying.
Yes, it is.
And when you see the sort of out of control, as you described, sort of administration as a result of Trump getting elected, and then all their plans for imperialism now going awry, it's a scary time for the next few weeks. And, what's he looking to set up? And I guess, leading into that, do you fear Trump as much as so many friends of ours on the left seem to be, running around pants on fire?
Well, this is a time of great contradiction. So you can be both afraid of and happy to see the same person. I think Trump I don't think Trump could have a worse foreign policy, frankly. But the things that people are afraid of, first of all, just having a Republican and having Republicans control the courts, or dismantle Obamacare, as ineffectual as it was, will it be something worse? His comments about immigration and Islamophobia and keeping out Muslim immigrants, all these things are cause for concern. But so yes, people have reason to be concerned about Trump coming into office. But I think we have reason to fear the Democrats these last few weeks before they leave, before Obama leaves. And but I think it's important for people to remember that we can depend on ourselves. The greatest, best changes have come in this country when the people tell the leaders what they want. So people are going to protest in Washington and around the country on Inauguration Day. But the question is, what are you protesting? Are you just protesting because Trump won? Are you protesting because you don't want more deportations, which, by the way, Obama did more than any other president? Are you going to protest the Democratic Party? Because I think that is a very important thing to do. So, and all of the things we want to protest, let's not forget that the Democrats didn't do anything about them. Abortion rights. Everybody's in a panic about abortion rights. Well, what did Democrats do about it? They let Republicans take over these states, and they, it's a lot of lip service. So, so there is reason for concern. We must mobilize and be active about the issues that we care about. But I don't think we need to start January 20th. We all need to be very concerned about these very dangerous moves that Obama and the Democrats are cooking up these last few weeks.
In his column this week, Chris Hedges kind of talked about going forward into the Trump era. And he seemed to be suggesting that it's time to start rebuilding civil society locally. That the sort of what's going to come down as a sort of national security apparatus under Trump will be almost suicidal to go up against it in any shape or form. We saw what happened even with Occupy under Obama. That was half suicidal. And he's suggesting, which seems to make sense to me and resonate, that it's time to start rebuilding civil society locally, where we can make a difference here in our own communities.
Well, I think that's always important. That there of course is the old saying that all politics are local. There's so much for people to be concerned about all over the country. I mean, here in New York, around the country, gentrification and people being displaced. This is something that has never been a Democratic issue. Or reproductive rights, or the rights of immigrants, police violence. All of these are things that we can be active with everywhere, all over the country. So I do agree with him, but I think we need to have mass civil disobedience, and it has to be huge. Dare I say huge, all around the country, because I do think there is repression coming. And it's starting, but it's starting with Democrats. Obama inserted some language into the Defense Authorization Act.
Yes.
And it's a very dangerous thing. It doesn't say we can round people up, but it's the beginning. It's the start of monitoring websites and monitoring the press. Lest we forget,
I think they call anti-propaganda is I think the
yes.
using.
Well, what's that? What's propaganda? I mean, the New York Times, every time I open the New York Times or read it online, there's more lies coming straight from the top.
Yep.
So I guess it's not propaganda if it's coming from the White House and their friends in the corporate media. But these things are all very dangerous. It all started, and each president escalates. So Bush starts to, with the Patriot Act. We're all monitored. All our emails, all our social media, all our phone calls are on record with the NSA. And if Trump does that, it'll be because Obama opened the door and gave it to him. So so these are very scary times. But I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion about who our enemies are. I think both wings of the duopoly are our enemies. The Democrats may be even worse because they have this veneer of concern for our rights, a veneer of concern for diversity. And so they get to play this role as being the safer party when in fact they are not. So I don't even think that should this repression really come down and hit us, I don't know if most people who are in the Democratic camp will see it for what it is, or well, they may see it if it's Trump doing it, but
Yeah.
only while there's a Republican doing it.
Yeah, well, I guess the notion of that if Hillary got in, people would have gone back to sleep, and hopefully Trump is causing people to wake up. I mean, look, I thought they would wake up in 2008 when their money and their homes and their pensions and all that disappeared. People didn't seem to wake up; they just went back to sleep and went shopping
Yeah.
with unborrowed money. So I hope the awakening happens. And I guess we'll see. It's going to be interesting going forward. I wish you a healthy New Year, 2017, and I hope we can speak again soon after the New Year.
Yeah, well, we're, the old expression, may you live in interesting times. We're about to find out who really wants to live in interesting times because there's interesting stuff coming. But thank you and Happy New Year to you too,
Amen.
Craig.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.